Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning to you.
So just last weekend, the nation celebrated the 50 years since the Selma voting rights movement that crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Now this weekend, we're talking about Ferguson again, racist fraternity chat, and a search of other university chapters to determine if they're using the same thing. What does that say about relations in America today?
Well, I think we need to be first honest if we're going to have a conversation about race in America and racism in America. Racism is as American as March Madness, as Apple computers, as Nike shoes. It's embedded in our society. This country is rooted in it, and we'd be lying to ourselves if we said it was any other way. And so I'm not surprised by the things that have been happening. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are woefully miseducated, who are rooted in hatred and fear of people who are different from them, and it has led to really incredible acts of violence and injustice toward our fellow human beings. That's where we are in this society. I have hope because I travel this country extensively as an activist, as a speaker. I see people of different backgrounds working together, but it's not going to change if we don't get to the systemic causes of racism in our country.
You know, there are some people, after you make that statement about racism being as American as Nike shoes and all the rest, there are some people who believe that racism is gone, that race has no place in America. Then you have people on the other spectrum who see race as the driving force for everything. And you've got the middle. Is that middle growing in which they see some of these infractions across the country and can have that conversation?
Well, I mean,
or
here's the thing.
Extremes growing?
Well, here's the thing. There's no left or right or middle. The reality is I want to live in a post-racism world, a post-racism America. And it's going to take black people, white people, Latino people, Asian people, Native American people, Middle Eastern people, Jewish people, people of all different backgrounds and faiths coming together and saying that, this should not be a construct where there is a superiority for one group of people and inferiority for other people. There shouldn't be this construct where people are not learning about each other through the school system, be it public schools or private schools. It should not be a construct where we're constantly demanding, equality in the mass media culture, in film and TV. That's part of the problem, which is we keep putting Band-Aids on the situation. We keep talking around the situation, and we need to be willing to get to the root of the situation. And President Obama was right. I don't condone any form of violence. I don't. I believe in peace and love, and all of us as sisters and brothers, and I think that's the beloved community that Dr. King was talking about. But we're not going to get there if we're not willing to have the very difficult conversations about the history of our nation, as well as current events, not just the fraternity as an isolated incident, not just Ferguson as an isolated incident, but something that permeates every aspect of our society.
You brought up the term post-racism America, and it reminded me of the post-racial America people expected back in 2009 with the inauguration of President Obama. I want to read your own words.
Well, that was how do I say it?
Let me read this back to you because I want to put this in context for you, for people to understand.
Yeah,
this is
post-racial
you wrote
suggests
after
that we somehow have gotten past all these racial hurdles in our society. That's not the case at all.
Yeah.
The fact that the sitting president of the United States has been threatened as much, if not more, than any other president, the level of disrespect that he's faced as the president of the United States, much of it, a lot of us feel, is attributed to his racial background. The fact that there's been this explosion, seemingly, of black males being racially profiled and murdered around the country during the Obama years suggests that we are not even close to being in a post-racial America. And it is disingenuous for us to even use that term. We should be striving towards the beloved community or post-racist community that Dr. King was talking about, and that takes a tremendous amount of work, the kind of work that we saw demonstrated with this anniversary of Selma, in the film Selma, and people have got to be willing to come together to do that. That's the only way this is going to change. I believe it can happen, but it can't just be us talking about it. We've got to really get out there and do the work on all levels.
You wrote something in the weeks after what happened, Mike Brown's death in Ferguson. You wrote, and it's put up on the screen, "I do not know what's going to happen in Ferguson, Missouri, in America. I do know that the crisp night Barack Obama won the presidency and announced in Chicago, change has come to America, now seems like a century ago. Dare I say it, but the United States seems more divided than ever, more violent than ever, filled with more hate and ignorance and fear than ever." I also want to put up this poll done by CNN and ORC in which it asks about race relations under Obama. 45% of whites believe they're worse. 26% of blacks believe they're worse. You can see most people here believe that they're the same. Is there, I mean, nobody's blaming the president for race relations, but was that expectation set and now there's some correlation between the election of the president and the way people feel about race relations?
Well, I think that it was a beautiful, multicultural, multi-generational movement that made Barack Obama's presidency happen in the first place in 2008. The same kind of beautiful, multi-generational, multicultural movement that was the civil rights movement with Selma and voting rights and civil rights in the 1950s and 1960s. The problem is that we get into these spaces, we do this work for a short period of time, and then we stop, and then it's almost like we take 4 or 5 steps backwards. You know, if as a black male or any person of color, we should not have to worry about if we go to certain communities in this country in 2015, you know, we may be the victims of some form of racial profiling. That should be unacceptable in our society. It should be unacceptable in our society, a civilized nation, that we incarcerate more people than any other country on the planet, and the vast majority of them are black and Latino young people, males, and a growing number of females in our society. It should be unacceptable the massive levels of poverty in society and the disproportionate number of folks who are people of color who are experiencing poverty in this country. These are the kind of things that President Lyndon Johnson and Dr. King were talking about, you know, 50 years ago. And so, yes, I can say I sit here as the child of a mother with an 8th grade education, a grandmother who was illiterate. I can say there's been tremendous progress, including racial progress in this country. I went to college, but I can't just look at myself and say, well, I did all right. What about the vast majority of people in my community and communities around the country who are still dealing with systemic racism? That's what we've got to address. And, you know, a lot of folks will say, you know, we're harping on the past and things have, have improved. No, things will improve when we really are all treated as equal human beings in our society, no matter what our background. That's the world that I want to get to.
All right, Kevin Powell, president and co-founder of BK Nation. Kevin, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.